Hello, and welcome to the first episode of the Gloomy Girl podcast, where we deep dive into the dark and unusual. I'm Samantha, your host. In today's episode, we're going to be talking about one of the most notorious serial killers in modern British history. You may or may not have heard of him, Dr. Harold Shipman, a respected family doctor who concealed a dark secret for many, many years. His story is a shocking reminder of how trust in medical professionals can be dangerously misplaced. Shipman's crimes led to the deaths of potentially over 200 patients, making him one of the deadliest serial killers of all time. Let's explore how someone who was supposed to heal instead became a killer. Harold Frederick Shipman was born on January 14th of 1946 in Nottingham, England. He grew up in a working-class family, and from a young age, he showed an aptitude for academics. So it sounds like, hey, so far he's doing well, right? Well, when did it all go wrong? Shipman eventually pursued a career in medicine and became a doctor, which was seen as an achievement in his community. By the early 1970s, he completed his medical training and became a doctor. He was practicing in a small town in Yorkshire. To the outside world, Shipman was a dedicated and caring physician. He worked tirelessly for patients, earning their respect and trust. However, behind closed doors, his true narrative was far darker. Shipman's method of killing was chilling. He used lethal doses of different opioids that he had easy access to as a doctor. For years, he took advantage of his position of trust and authority to end the lives of his patients, many of whom were elderly women. It wasn't until 1998 that suspicion started to surface. Dr. Shipman's patients were dying in an unusually high number, especially considering his practice was in an area with an older population. Many of these deaths were registered as natural causes, and the families had no reason to question the doctor's word. However, one family, the family of 81-year-old Kathleen Grundy, decided to dig deeper. Kathleen had been a well-known local figure in the town of Hyde, and her sudden death was ruled as a result of natural causes, even though she appeared to be in relatively good health. However, when her daughter Angela Woodruff took a closer look at the circumstances, she found something odd. Kathleen had recently made a will, leaving her estate to Dr. Shipman. The will was signed just days before her death, and it seemed to have been forged. Angela's suspicion grew, and she called in the police. A post-mortem examination of Kathleen revealed that she had died from an overdose of opioids, which immediately raised alarms. Shipman, who had been her doctor, had signed her death certificate. This was the first crack in what seemed perfect. Once investigators began to examine the circumstances of Kathleen Grundy's death, they started looking into Shipman's other patients. What they discovered was horrifying. The more they dug, the more inconsistencies they found in his patients' deaths. In total, the police uncovered evidence linking Shipman to at least 215 suspicious deaths, most of them elderly women. By 1999, Shipman was arrested and charged with murder. His trial, which began in 2000, captivated the nation. The prosecution argued that Shipman had murdered his patients over a period of 23 years for a variety of reasons: greed, a desire for control, and perhaps a twisted sense of pleasure from his ability to end lives. Despite his position as a respected doctor, Shipman denied the charges and maintained his innocence, but the evidence against him was overwhelming. Shipman's method of killing was especially insidious. He would often inject his victims with a fatal dose of opioids and then stage the scene to make it look like they had died of natural causes. His patients trusted him, never suspecting that their doctor was the one taking their lives. Well, in this case, would soon take their lives. In many cases, Shipman was the only one present when they died. Harold Shipman's trial was a long and grueling process. The prosecution presented a staggering amount of evidence. including testimonies from families who had lost loved ones and forensic evidence linking Shipman to their deaths. But it wasn't just the number of victims that shocked people. It was the nature of Shipman's crimes. He wasn't driven by a need for money or power. Many of his victims didn't even have large estates or wealth to inherit. Instead, he seemed to be motivated by a deep-seated sense of control, perhaps even a sadistic pleasure in ending lives. In January 2000, after a lengthy trial, Shipman was found guilty of the murder of 15 patients and sentenced to life in prison. He was also suspected of many more murders, but with the evidence available at the time, he could not be convicted of all of them. Harold Shipman's conviction brought some closure to the families of his victims. The damage was already done. His crimes caused an erosion of trust in the medical profession, especially among the elderly, who were the majority of his victims. Shipman's case sparked changes in the way doctors are monitored and how the death certificates are scrutinized. But for many, the idea that a trusted medical professional could be capable of such horrific acts remains deeply unsettling. In 2004, Shipman was found dead in his prison cell, having passed away by unaliving himself. He was 57 years old. It was said that he had to do it before he was 60 so his wife could get the higher amount of spousal income. His death closed the final chapter of this story. But his gruesome crimes still remain with the families. Those who are still remain alive. Those that have to live with it every day. It's not right. What drives someone to do such evil things to someone? The scale of his killings combined with the fact that he was a doctor makes his case one of the most chilling in modern history. Dr. Harold Shipman's story is a haunting reminder of the potential dangers that lie in the places where we feel safest. It's hard to imagine that someone who took an oath to care for the sick and vulnerable could become the person who ends their lives. But Shipman was a master of manipulation, and for years he preyed on the trust of his patients and their families. Thank you for listening to this episode. I hope that by sharing the story of Dr. Harold Shipman, we can continue to raise awareness about the dangers of blind trust and the importance of questioning authority, even when it comes from those who are supposed to heal us. May his victims be at peace and his families have as much closure as they can. Remember, we can always be the light in all the dark. Until next time, sleep well.